Morning. My name is Sharita Cole Brown, and I am on the NAMI Maryland Board of Directors. It is my privilege today to introduce the next seminar, which is Balance and Wellness Strategies to Combat Vicarious Trauma. We will have Tony Barker and Marla Polk, and they will explain exactly what it is that they do and how it is that they will help us. The Q&A portion of the talk will be at the end. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat and we will talk about it at the end. So now here's Tony.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And thank you very much for having us here today. Our company is called Resolution Solutions, and we've been helping first responders since 2017, presenting law enforcement, nurses, EMTs, clergy, and other victim-facing professionals with trauma-informed care techniques and self-care strategies. Our team also works directly with women that have been victims of violent crime, not as counselors or therapists, but from a communication standpoint, improving post-trauma relationships with employers, families, and others that they have to deal with. Our very first message to you is this: thank you so much. We very much appreciate you being here, and we are incredibly grateful for your service to those in need, whether you have chosen this as a profession or kind of ended up because you've stepped up and done what needed to be done for a family member or somebody online. It's just so important. It's so huge. So I'd like to introduce the team. Our managing partner and founding partner of Resolution Solution is Marla Polk. She's a communication coach and a mediator in the state of Texas. She has a master's certification in conflict resolution and works regularly with women who have been victims of violent crimes. Patty Winnick-Schlager is an associate judge of the 326th Judicial District Court. She's been a professor at Abilene Christian University, an attorney, including an ad litem attorney for children, for CPS children. She's a CPS certified mediator. She's a partner with Resolution Solutions and consults with us on the training materials. Kathy Giebler is a marriage and family therapist in Texas. Kathy is part of the Women's Empowerment Group at the Palm House and adds her guidance and experience to our presentations. The Palm House is a wonderful ministry, and we'd be glad to answer questions about that as it progresses. I came to Resolution Solutions after a TEDx talk on my work in transformational thinking, using my military and martial arts and management experience to help young people make a shift from the school thinking to being part of the workplace, being accountable for what they bring to someone else's effort. Our mission is quite simply to reduce the re-victimization of women who have been victims of violent crime. That comes down from the Violence Against Women Act federally, through our state governor's office, and to the Palm House, and through them to Resolution Solutions. We've done this mission by training first responders in trauma-informed care, and also in the subject of this session today, self-care. What we've found over the years is that it's critical to understand the why question, particularly as it relates to self-care. When I was a kid, I heard the phrase, "The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." And I understood what they were saying, but I also knew that it was wrong, because the journey across the street to my friend Stevie's house had better start before that first step. A polite conversation with mom was in order. Permission was involved. Stevie and his parents had to be evaluated. Weather and traffic were taken into account, and mercy be upon the child who takes that first step before the other steps were completed. I had a traditional Southern mom, and they don't tolerate, just put it that way. So then there was logistics. I was too young to know what that word logistics meant, but I knew that even if I took my bike instead of walking 1,000 miles, I would probably miss dinner, and maybe several dinners. I didn't think I could carry enough food for 1,000 miles, and I had no idea how or where to hunt for my own peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in the wild. So here's how this relates to self-care. We'll be presenting tools and techniques that just quite simply work. And many of them you've heard before. You may hear some today. They just work. Some have origins that are thousands of years old, and some of the result are of strict contemporary science. You know that paperwork that everybody's hated for all these years? This is where it ends up. So if you ever feel bogged down by it, hopefully this can bring a little comfort, because the result is that we have tools now to apply our brain's own abilities and mechanisms in the service of healing itself. Before that can happen, though, we really have to make an informed decision about that why question and truly lean into that process. If we don't, all the meditation and bubble baths and sensory stimulation in the world are absolutely useless. It's a serious threat to the wellness of caregivers and first responders and other amazing humans like yourselves that make it their lives' work to help people that are in crisis. It's called secondary trauma or vicarious trauma or compassion fatigue or burnout, and the effects can range from very negative to downright dangerous. And it's only been in the past few decades that it's been looked at as a significant hazard. Before that, it was blown off or brushed aside by professionals as, well, it's just part of the job or something you have to shake off. But once we've named it out loud, it starts to come under the category of denial, to revert back to that old line of thinking. So the calling that brings you here today is amazing and beautiful, and we can't thank you enough for it. It blows me away that you've chosen to make a career out of helping people like my mom and everyone else that you would call a client or a patient. Sometimes, of course, being someone's primary caregiver is not something you have much choice about, other than the choice to step up and do what needs to be done. However you've arrived here, I hope these ideas and techniques help give you strength and build your resilience to this secondary trauma. I'm betting that you wouldn't be here if you weren't basically nice people. You would not have gone through the kind of training if you didn't have some kind of compassion and empathy for people. I could be wrong. Is anybody in it here just for the money and the fame? Anybody? Glory? Glory? Anybody with the glory? No? Okay, didn't think so. Just checking. But the trouble with all that connection is that intense, repeated connection is that it brings you into close contact with more trauma than most civilians will see in a lifetime. So let's start by agreeing on what the term trauma actually means. The medical community has a specific definition, but most applicable for our purposes here today is that when a single event or a long-term circumstance overwhelms a person's ability to cope with it. That's the important part. It overwhelms a person's ability to cope with the circumstances. What brought comfort or a healthy path forward no longer works. It stimulates the release of the fight, flight, or freeze chemicals and hormones that help the body get through extreme life-threatening distress, but it comes at a significant cost to the wellness of caregivers in other areas. I know that fawn was recently added to the famous 3 Fs and that it has its own repercussions, but we're going to stay with the fight, flight, or freeze intentionally. And we want to look at what happens in the brain when experiencing trauma. For some, this will be a review, but our hope is that we're connecting some dots in a new way that maybe refreshes our perspective. So you obviously know that in life or death situations, the human body is capable of extraordinary feats of strength or speed. And that process begins in the brain with a release of hormones and chemicals in a system that has its own name. It's called the HPA Axis. The hypothalamus signals the pituitary gland, which signals the adrenals to release this chemical stew. There are 4 main substances that are released, but there are actually quite a bit more, many more, but 2 hormones and 2 chemicals in particular have the biggest effect in most people. The hormones are adrenaline and cortisol, both of which fuel the fight or flight response in the body, but again, they come at a cost. The function of the brain is somewhat impaired. Adrenaline specifically impairs rational thought. Cortisol has an effect on memory, sometimes resulting in fragmented recall, specific images, bits and pieces of events. The chemicals that are released are heavyweights also. We carry these around all the time, and they're released in these extremist situations. The survival needs for opioids and oxytocin, which are the heavyweight chemicals, are in pain reduction. both physical and emotional, so that you can deal with the saber tooth, whatever it is that's gnawing on your thigh bone, as well as a bit of a mood elevator so that you have enough hope to imagine a path forward and visualize a way out of this predicament. They can, however, be a big factor in the freeze part of the fight, flight, or freeze response. The purpose of this system is to help the body react to the emergency, obviously. It's developed over time because it's generally useful in these physical extreme situations. But the side effect of the process is that it affects memory, rational thought, communication, and reactions to all stimuli. Sometimes these side effects are massive. Sometimes they're minimal. Sometimes they dissipate right away. Sometimes they last for years. Think PTSD. By the way, this is where law enforcement sometimes gets the bad rap about re-victimizing victims of assault. The person they're interviewing is a victim who has this chemical stew sloshing around up there, and they're liable to get things wrong. Timelines will be off, memory gaps seem unreasonable, and even the most basic facts will get jumbled up. When you give a police officer questionable information or don't know the answers to simple questions, how many people were in the room or were they wearing a hat, they know they're not getting the truth, and their training and basic intentions cause them to start digging for it. They're liable to start digging for the truth. And they have the best of intentions. They're trying to catch the bad guy while he's still in the area. And that can feel a little bit like police and victims are on opposing teams. That's one of the consistent feedbacks that Marla and Patty and Kathy receive from these women that have been victims, is that they feel like they weren't connected with, they weren't heard, they weren't listened to. These people are just trying to get their paperwork done, and it's a separation between people that need the help and people that can provide it. Excuse me. Also, according to the National Institute of Justice, 86% of rape cases never get past the police interview for many reasons, some of which are the credibility issues. You know, if you can't even get that straight, you know, that kind of thing. Another complication, particularly in the freeze response, is something called tonic immobility. It's the response. The freeze response is so intense that it's a form of paralysis. Arms and legs simply will not obey the commands that are given to them by the brain. The victim doesn't know why, and they can't explain it, and it absolutely sounds questionable to police and to anybody else that's involved in this. So police and family members, again, with the best of intentions, tend to ask, well, why didn't you just fill in the blank? Scream, fight, run, call 911. And more than anything else, this is really a lack of understanding about what trauma physically does to the brain. Now, it's bad wherever it occurs, but it's particularly troublesome for people that are struggling with mental illness. It's one more barrier to the communication and connection right at the time when it's most needed. And the big picture is that trauma, the chemistry of trauma, can have a serious effect on the brain, and understanding that is critical to addressing it. There is another aspect of the brain function that helps us understand how to take better care of victims and clients, as well as taking care of ourselves. And so we need to understand, basically, and I'm going to go over this real quick, how we process the world in different areas from which we do so. There are three main areas of the brain used. The prefrontal cortex is where we process rational thought and logic. This is where we can connect with each other the most effectively. The midbrain, especially the amygdala, lights up under strong emotional conditions. And the brainstem, or medulla oblongata, for those of you keeping score at home, is responsible for basic survival functions, autonomic functions like heartbeat, respiration. It's why we can sleep, because we don't have to think about keeping our heart and lungs working. Author Tim Urban of Wait But Why puts it this way: we all have three brains, a human brain, a monkey brain, and a lizard brain. The human we can talk to and understand and make agreements with that are meaningful. The monkey brain is driven by fear or pleasure. He's either running away from the alligators or trying to find the party. The lizard brain only kicks in and kind of takes over when there's some kind of emergency, when you have to swim up to the surface or outrun Bigfoot or whatever is going on. Development of this system happens in stages. We're babies, we eat, sleep, and poop on kind of autopilot. But a toddler is a little older and has a little more brain available. They can walk down the street with an ice cream cone, and the world is rainbows and puppies. And then the ice cream slips off the cone and lands on the sidewalk. And now the whole world is a dark and terrible place where ice cream does not exist. And mom will never again buy them mint chocolate chip with those little sprinkly things on top. Then we get a little older, we learn about ice creamonomics, and we can get our own ice cream. But trauma can create a regressive state. It can bring us backwards through this process. This is where we see grown adults who look like they ought to know better, making absolutely terrible decisions right when clear thinking is what is most needed. So with the chemistry of trauma and the fact that the midbrain can sometimes give our emotions an outsized role in decision-making, we start to see the effects spreading to other areas like memory. The midbrain houses the hippocampus as well as the amygdala, and a function that they're heavily associated with is the forming of memory. They take the sensory input of seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, and smelling and convert that information into data that we can use later. This process is significantly altered by the chemical process, but also by how emotionally charged the incident is. Now, trauma is trauma is trauma. Whether it's natural disaster, an automobile accident, repeated involvement in the trauma of others, or some form of assault. These chemicals and this process kicks in to varying degrees, but when there are strong emotions attached to the trauma, the memory forming mechanism is particularly affected. If someone that you can absolutely rely on and trust to love you and nurture and take care of you violates that trust, it very strongly affects the formation of memories regarding the trauma in particular. So we've mentioned that one of the variables here is how long the effects of trauma might last. It's very important to know when someone is processing things through this reasoning part of the brain or from some other part, because they can sound very similar. Here's some outward signs that someone is sort of stuck in fight mode. Now, obviously, we're not trying to play armchair psychiatrist, and we're not going to try to train anybody in that. And a lot of these things can happen without actual trauma. Not everyone that's crying is experiencing trauma in that moment. I've seen people cry because their football team lost. But when a lot of these are present, it is a useful indicator that the person you're dealing with may not be at their best, that they may be processing you from this emotional monkey part of the brain. Likewise, the flight reflex is someone tapping their feet or fidgeting might not be in crisis, but when there's an obvious tendency to seek out an escape or to put physical barriers between them and the person that they're talking to, it may need to be addressed before rational conversation is possible. George Bernard Shaw said that the biggest illusion in communication is that it actually happened. And this is one of those places where that goes on. If you're thinking and they're feeling, it can sometimes intersect, but it's common not to. The freeze response it might look like someone is just completely shut down or just less engaged in what's going on around them. But any of these response modes can be challenging, whether they show up in a traumatized victim or if we see them start slowly building up in ourselves or as a coworker. So the pertinent question is, what do we do about this? Many of the techniques we teach to mitigate symptoms of trauma and secondary trauma can be used as prevention. That's ideal before we get to a necessary where an intervention is a place where intervention is necessary to keep damage from happening or from becoming unmanageable. Early in the 20th century, electricity started becoming commonplace in the homes. Very quickly, the concept of grounding was introduced so that any excess electricity, whether it be lightning or Uncle Bushrod wiring up that newfangled clothes drying machine, any source of excess capacity that is bigger than the capacity of the system, that overwhelms the system, would pass to Earth without turning the entire neighborhood into a giant taser. And the whole secret to making this work is having the ground connection in place ahead of time. Knowing that the risk exists gives you time to take preventative measures. The lesson here, of course, is to plan for the spikes in that current. It's not coincidence that it's also a term used for a particular type of coping strategy that's designed to ground you when you have secondary trauma. We know that by the time you have, or by the time you notice these symptoms, trouble may have been brewing for quite a while. So what are the symptoms? Generally long-term symptoms. A person that is stuck in trauma might display some of these symptoms. Again, not necessarily a way to diagnose anybody or anything that serious, but just to watch out for the idea of the symptoms of trauma, where the purpose of of spiritual symptoms, maybe the questioning the meaning of life and all that, again, might occur independently of trauma, but it's something to watch out for if you start seeing a lot of these. We have another slide with more of these symptoms. A person withdraws, or the opposite, becomes clingy, and all these things. I'm not going to read the entire slide. I can't stand it when people do that. I'm not doing it to you. You're welcome. But we will make it available. We'll absolutely make this available to everybody that's that is interested in it. So these symptoms, thank you. These symptoms of trauma, there's 2 pages of them here. I have 2 slides with the symptoms of trauma. I'm going to do this rapidly just so that you'll notice that the symptoms of secondary trauma are precisely the same. Absolutely and precisely the same, all the way down the line. Secondary, it presents with identical symptoms. The same hormonal and chemical dump happens, the same effects, the same side effects. The only difference is that it's caused by exposure to trauma of others, particularly repeated trauma, particularly with people that are that have a lot of empathy, that are closely emotionally connected to the people. Even if you try to be professionally detached, I mean, it's just, you're nice people, and it shows up. Repeated exposure makes it far more likely to be worse. Also, if you have had childhood trauma, you're more at risk for secondary trauma symptoms. And it's important to understand that trauma does not, you can't build it up and build up resilience to it by adding more trauma. It's more like an erosive effect where it kind of wears down over time. Repeated exposure to trauma only makes that worse. So again, what do we do about it? One thing is to realize that you're not alone, that you have a team on your side. Somewhere down the line, there's a team or a group of people that are experiencing what you experience. We know with depression that it's one of those things that makes people feel isolated. But you do have a team for it, and this does exist. It's like lung cancer in the days have gone by, very tragic but common occupational hazard of mining coal. There are risks associated with repeated exposure to trauma. And one of the reasons we're here today is because leadership in fields all over the place, law enforcement, any kind of first responders, everybody, leadership is examining that data that's coming out now, and we're looking that monster in the eye and leaning forward into the scary things. And that's something that you do exceptionally well, for which we are all, the entire community is grateful. So these warning signs of secondary trauma, we're trained to see it coming, but we still end up with these signs of secondary trauma. Marla and Patty and Kathy have all reported rumination, unwanted thoughts that are kind of keeping them awake, and hearing these stories. Again, we're not diving into the past thing. They are more of communication coaching, how to deal with bosses and family and church and communities, but they still hear a bit of it, but without seeing actual injuries or trauma or blood. Theirs is almost tertiary trauma, and they know that it's coming, and it still comes. So that just points to the need for understanding the mechanism and understanding the fact that it's coming, and there are things that can be done about it. That's really the big takeaway, is that there are things that can be done. I've been presenting along with Marla and Patty since the very beginning, but filming some witnesses in another project left me with some thoughts popping up when they're not convenient, when I've got other things to do. And I just, your rumination is, wishing that something would have been different, or you had information earlier, or that sort of thing. And man, it can get into you. Again, we've all been trained in this, and we've all been training others for 4 years. And I ran across a news article about another church shooting here in Texas. And again, I'm more aware than most, but I lost my aunt and uncle to a church shooting in Sutherland Springs a number of years ago. And just seeing that story again, totally unprepared for it, totally unprepared for it. So here's another aspect of that. I was at that scene and I was watching it go on, and I was noticing how it's, through military background and other experiences, there were procedures in place. Now, there was every type of law enforcement there. There was Texas Rangers, local PD, sheriffs, state troopers, FBI. All of these people were there, and they're trained to be in charge by temperament and by training. They're in charge of what's going on. But the basic facts of the situation were out of their control. There was no way they could do anything that made a significant difference. And Marla ran into one of these first responders at a conference we were presenting at in Dallas. And they were saying that, they're still affected by this. That it still it causes them trouble. These professionals, it causes them trouble. So we're not going to see half of what you see over the course of your career. And again, we're familiar with the concept. So it points to the very intentional effort that is required to mitigate this. And again, what can we do about it? That's the whole point of what we're talking about. What can we do about it? And the answer is to maintain a balance well below the limit of, when things are overwhelming. Your balance has to be as low as possible in ordinary conditions, so that when that, God forbid, the big one comes in, you're more resilient. The process works for everyone, and it's great as a maintenance procedure. From the standpoint of the brain, the best technique for dealing with it, secondary trauma, is to get back to the prefrontal cortex as soon as possible after exposure to trauma or any incident, spending the least amount of time in that fight, flight, or freeze or fawn mode. Current data suggests that the most effective technique for doing so is to stimulate as many other sections of the brain simultaneously as possible, engaging the 5 senses as best we can: sight, smell, hearing, touch, and taste, stimulating the neuron activity in these areas quickly and thoroughly is the best way we know of to keep from getting stuck in any of those modes. And to that end, we've created this sensory stimulation kit. For your own secondary trauma, what we've put together as a kit, and this is just a bit of a suggestion, and we would love for you to personalize something like this on your own, but it's just items that demand the brain's response. There's sandpaper in here, because when you pick up sandpaper, you will process the part of your brain. You will stimulate the part of your brain that processes our feeling. Bubble wrap, popping paper, or whatever you want to call it, is another sensory stimulation that requires your brain to activate that mode. The taste sensation, if you can, pop in a peppermint or a chocolate, because of course chocolate cures everything, as we all know. And to do all of these things as much as possible, put on or take off a pair of sunglasses. We use as a little gift some earbuds to remind people to maybe listen to their favorite song, or if conditions don't permit, listen to what is around you. And look at what's around you. Intentionally look at the colors of the walls. Find your favorite color somewhere in your scenery and look at it. And we have this new car smell, or any smell, lavender or hand lotion or anything that you carry with you, to stimulate the senses. But it's important to do 2 things with this kit. One, we would prefer that you carry it with you so that you would personalize it so that you carry it with you. The other is that you reach for it on a regular basis. When those moments come that you might need a little bit of extra grounding and extra encouragement to do something, you reach for this kit that you've created and stimulate all sections of your brain simultaneously. That's really one of the keys, so that your brain is very much occupied in processing all of these things and events and smells and sounds. The other is that if you do it on a regular basis, and you have developed your trust in this tool, then again, when those, God forbid, calls come in, then you have a tool you can trust and you know that you can reach for that. And if nothing else, it's a great tool to have at the ready. It's not obviously guaranteed, but it's something positive you can do, and something positive that you can share with someone that is experiencing an intense moment of trauma. And it's obviously not a guarantee, but it's a great thing to have at the ready. So we are going to talk about the ABCs of wellness. And this is another thing, and it's simple. Everybody uses like ABCs or 1, 2, 3s or whatever like that. Please don't let the cliche of it get in the way of it. I'm writing that one down. Awareness, huge, almost the defining moment of knowing that this is coming so that you can be prepared for it. I've never been bitten by a spider that I could watch coming to me. Like, oh, I hope he's in a good mood today. It's the guy that's in your glove or your boot that gets you. The awareness that it is coming, the awareness that it is this serious, is what's critical. Being in tune with yourself and others around you, being mindful of things. It's the opposite of just kind of walking through on autopilot. Balance is a huge, is another huge aspect of this. Make sure that when you're off work, completely off work. We'll talk about ways to make sure that you kind of incorporate that. And then connectivity, but connection with your team, because they're essentially your tribe. They understand the regulations that you deal with, the acronyms that you use, the language overall, the goals. They understand a lot of that. And then please connect with your family or your friends outside of the work about a different thing. Don't try to explain to them your acronyms, but if it's a bowling league, dive into bowling or knitting or gardening. Gardening is beautiful. Whatever it is that you do it with all of your heart, mind, and spirit as best you can, and it will give you a bit of a break in an area where we definitely need a break. So here's this life balance breakdown. We've done the math, and we've discovered that there are 168 hours in everybody's week. We've also discovered that everyone sleeps for 8 hours a night, right? I can hear them laughing through the screen. Everybody's muted, but I can hear that. Listen, not everybody gets 8 hours. Not everybody needs 8 hours. Not everybody needs 8 hours. You can do with less. But here's the warning thing about that. If you're sacrificing sleep in order to get more done, that's not a sustainable set of circumstances. If rumination is causing you to lose sleep, either of those situations, whether it's whether it's kind of a choice you're making unintentionally or it's something that's happening to you, either one of those is depleting resources that you need at work. Worse, when you're walking around in a daze, you're prone to make mistakes, poor communication, kind of grouchy. And the consequences of those things will add stress into your life all by themselves, possibly causing more sleep loss and all that sort of stuff. Whatever your sleep needs are, please defend them as if they are a very, very valuable resource, however you need to do that. 45 hours for work, we're just using these numbers as a placeholder kind of deal, because here's the important. That leaves 67 hours or maybe 60 or whatever those hours are that you have control over. And they're done, their families, hobbies, and maintenance. And what we're going to ask is that when you do any of those things, families, hobbies, and maintenance, you do them very intentionally, so much that you can kind of block out what's going on at work. It feels a little selfish, but what it is that we found that people that give, people that heal and bring wellness and nurture to others have a hard time with boundaries. So what we are asking is that you defend those boundaries, because if you have more capacity, you have more capacity to give and to help and to heal. That's a long story short on that kind of thing. So develop some plan and do it intentionally. That's what's really honestly critical. We're trying for prevention to avoid the need for intervention. So here's just an example of a way to do that. If you are already exercising, if you're on a treadmill anyway, consider, if weather permitting and all kinds of things permitting, that you go outside and walk the same distance, because when you're doing that, you're adding that extra sensory stimulation. You're going to feel the wind, you're going to smell the grass, you're going to hear the traffic, you're going to have to pay attention to your traction, to what's underneath you. You're going to have to feel gravel and track and all that sort of stuff. Similarly, if you like to doodle or create art with your pen, do that, please, while you are sipping on hot tea. And maybe you have a candle or a diffuser going, and you're listening to your favorite song. That sort of thing. We're going back to the idea of multiple sensory input, so that your brain is so busy it can't, revolve and rotate around what's going on at work. And then the connection section of that deal is that is, like we said earlier, understand that your team is there for you and you're there for your team. Sometimes it's important to look at those the earlier slides and the symptoms of somebody being stuck. Look at how everybody, including yourself, is acting and performing on a regular basis, and think, do I need to ask this person out for coffee? Because earlier is way better than later on this deal, much like many, many other things. So we have something that's that we're using the imagery here of a whole pie. We actually put that in the sensory stimulation kit. We used to carve pies before COVID, but everybody's got cookies now. But we're using the imagery of the whole pie to discuss these individual items. And I'm just going to zap over them really quickly, individually. And what it is, the beauty of this slide is that you can look at all of it and say, okay, something is you're great at. There's something on here that you're amazing at. Overcoming obstacles might be something that is a particular strength of yours, but going into the enjoyment and fun section might be something that's worth more intentional effort. And what we're asking with this 9 steps is that you balance those out. And if there's something that needs more work, please apply it to that if it's appropriate. It might not always be. You might need only 8 of these. You might be the person that doesn't need to overcome obstacles. I hope so. I hope you have very, very few obstacles in your life, but I kind of don't think so. So what's going well in your work life? Take stock of that. And because measuring something is the first step in improving it. So just taking stock of it. What needs attention in your work life? What is it that needs more help? And boundaries comes up again several times, many times. Boundaries, great project to work on first. Might be counterintuitive because it feels a little selfish. I'm going to pay attention to me now, and I need you guys to back off. But honestly, we do consulting for self-care and organizations, and invariably the overworked and overstressed people are the ones that think they can do it all and don't need help, and they're micromanaging everything, and they're the ones that only they can be trusted. And it's it's a little bit out of balance, and it might be time to let your team, might be time to accept that it's not going to be done as well as you can do it, but it needs to be done. So we have, so I think we're going to talk about just a way to break down your day. Your first hour of your day, find a place to just sit quietly just a minute. Hour 2, try to be creative. Doodle, use clay or knit or something on the other side of your brain. Think and take stock in hour 3. Resolve problems before they become bigger. Hour 4, eat something that's good, something that's healthy meal. I'm not saying go crazy with this, because again, we want balance. And there's healing in a Snickers bar, I will say. But too many Snicker bars, obviously we're out of balance, not going great. But hour 5, do something physical, move. There are chair exercises that are marvelous. You can, there's a really cool way to stimulate your vagal nerve. You should go up and down, and you can Google that. It's a very useful thing to let your body know that something has happened different than the rut that you may be in. Hour 6, intentionally hydrate. Hour 7, maybe chocolate, peppermint, essential oils stimulate that particular sense. And hour 8, prepare for tomorrow so that you can wake up with a bit of a plan. We all know what happens to plans. I'm telling you, we know what happens to plans. But having one, I find kind of helpful. And I hope you do too. So the second section is home life. What's going well? Are your relationships, friends particularly, giving you energy and building you up? Or do they kind of take it away? Are they a drain or an energy vampire? And just reevaluate stuff that might need to be looked at again. There's another thing that happens in a transition from work to home. At work, you're type A, you're needed, you're in charge of everything, you're on top of it, you're on the ball, you're going, and then you're at home and something feels like it's missing. And it's kind of boring maybe. And the way to relate to that intentionally is to understand that home life is obviously not work, but it's your resting place. It's your place to fill your cup back up with good stuff. That's the idea. You empty the cup as much as possible, and then you fill it with good stuff so that when you're at need or even at rest, you're your best version of yourself. Anything that happens bounces off the best version of you that you could possibly do. Whatever you do at home to relax, and again, boundaries could be an issue. You might have to ask the people that you love the most to give you a half an hour or an hour as soon as you walk in the door. You know, they've been building up stuff. Oh man, I can't wait till they get home. Pop this. Ask them to give you a half an hour for their sake as well. It's going to be better for them when you're better. And by directly requesting this respectful boundary, they're participating in your wellness, and that's good for them. And it signals that it's very important. It signals to you and it signals to them that wellness is something you're going to go after intentionally and specifically. Overcoming obstacles, we have all done this sort of stuff. Balance plan is a big deal, but here's an obstacle. Is it night shift? Is it rumination? Is it something physical that's happening to you as a result of illness or change or any of those things? If you're losing or sacrificing sleep, that's an obstacle. Too little sleep is how we get information out of Al-Qaeda. Quite honestly, it's that powerful. And it can lead to all kinds of breakdowns. The growth mindset, we're just talking about putting your mind to work on something else. Learn how to tie flies for fly fishing, how to maybe speak another language. It's worth investing time in. And it may not take a whole bunch. Pick up a guitar, figure out about gardening. Give yourself permission to make mistakes along the way, because at work sometimes you kind of can't, but if you've got a new hobby, well, it's not going to go perfectly at first. Enjoy that. That's a great moment. But hobbies, activities outside of work is a great balance. Emotional health is a little tricky because if you're having problems in that area, it's the hardest to recognize and realize. That's why it's so important to be emotionally fit before it's too late and we're trying to dig out of a pit. Every once in a while, do something that stimulates your emotional health. And one of those great things that we keep in the activity kit is just a little notepad to remind everyone to keep maybe a wellness journal, to write down something that's positive that happened, even little stuff, because we have a tendency to really remember the bad things or things that didn't work out. And it's tough to recall the times when somebody said, thank you. You really helped. You really helped me on this. Write that down. Absolutely. Write that down. Please write that down. Physical health. And again, I'm going to mention balance. I'm the last guy that wants to talk about how to guide you through a marathon training session. Not happening. No. I'm a martial artist. I'd rather stay and duke it out with whatever's chasing me. I'm not going to run away from a bear for 26 miles. But physical health. And sometimes that just means moving that needle. If there's a needle from getting worse to horrible, and another, and that same needle goes towards, getting better. Moving it off of zero is a very empowering thing, because things will tend to be dynamic. They're not static. They'll get worse and worse and worse, or they'll get better and better and better. But the better requires energy. It's the chaos theory. It's the better requires energy. And if you can move that needle from getting worse to getting better, it's not necessary to run a marathon. You just know that you've won and you've moved that energy into a new direction. And it is very powerful, and it feels very good, and it's very useful to have that victory that you can build on for the other victories. And we talked about running in nature. Interpersonal relationships are an interesting thing. I'm trying to wrap this up, so we'll make sure we got time for questions for Marla. But and we talked about coming home and making that transition intentionally. You remember, I hope maybe you'll remember Mr. Rogers. He would come in and he would take off his work jacket and put on a sweater. He would take off his work shoes and he would put on tennis shoes. And he was doing that as an intentional transition. I am no longer there. I am here and fully present with my family and my friends and this weird television thing. Enjoyment and fun. Easy part, unless it's not. There's a lot of people that again, it feels selfish to take this time and to do your own thing and all that sort of stuff. I don't even have time to take a shower. I can't take up a knitting class or any kind of thing along those lines. But I'm asking you, please, to put energy into this. Recognize what we talked about earlier about what the monster is that's coming, and these sorts of things will can go a long way towards mitigating that. So some of that is keeping the perspective in mind of other people that are having fun too. And I don't know, just there's a victory in that as well. If you're doing something that's really fun, if you're doing something that's kind of fun, bail on it. Do something else. You get one life. Do it to the fullest. Spiritual health is incredibly helpful. I'm not going to try to get proselytizing. I have my own faith system, and I have many friends in almost all other faith systems. But what they do is they allow you to have a connection that's very private, and that might be helpful. But the other thing it does, if that connection becomes wider than that, you've opened yourself up to acquiring a new sort of faith family that can be there in times of extremis, and in times where your family would step in. It's a family you've chosen, so there's other advantages just to connect, just to have that moment. Contemplative prayer or meditation, very fine line between those things, whichever you call it, do it, because it's very helpful. But also you might find yourself in the midst of another tribe, an entirely different tribe. So this is the whole pie wellness plan that we talk about. This is something we can do. Again, we'll absolutely be happy to send this to you. They already have it at NAMI. And I'll be glad to send it to you just as a review, just to look at it. And you'll probably hear this again several times. But there's a thing, and you'll probably hear this analogy as well. There's a thing that airlines do, particularly to mothers, that is extremely counterintuitive. And it's the idea that in an emergency, the plane's shaking and making funny noises and weird screams and all this sort of stuff. Air masks come down, and they're asking mothers to put their own on before they help their kid. And the bottom of this slide tends to overstate that, but the idea is that you can't help anybody if your cup is not full, and it matters a lot. And we're really pulling for you, and we're really counting on you. The people that you are helping need you to be at your best. Your boss, if you have a boss in your scenario, needs you to be at your best. The community needs you to be at your best. Your family and you need to be at your best. That's there's a mind-body relationship there where if you're at your best, you're less likely to be ill in a very large number of ways. And we're not talking about this me generation of me all the time, me and I'm the most important and all that sort of stuff. I'm talking about prioritizing yourself so that you can help others. You can't give your best to anyone. You can give something, but in some cases, when this goes on too long, when vicarious trauma and secondary trauma goes on too long, you end up with people whose mission is super critical, but they're kind of taking a knee because they're so stressed out about a whole bunch of things, and it's insidious. It's not a light switch like I'm okay, I'm not okay. It's very, very slowly developing, erosive, as I mentioned before. And the way to defeat that is to be vigilant about it. And it matters a whole lot. Thank you again very much for your time today. Thank NAMI. Thank everyone for the help in this technical production. We'll open this to questions. We're going to give you this on the screen, and I'm going to leave this slide up here. And when COVID came, we produced this self-care talk that we had been doing in person. And we produced it here in this production studio, and we made a free video, firstrespondersselfcare.help. So if you go there, it'll give you a good kind of fun reminders of what we've talked about here in terms of self-care. It's absolutely free, but I think there is a registration process because we're on a grant. And if we get the right number of people in our area, then we get a free toaster or something. I don't know how that works. But we have, I'm going to leave this up while we talk about questions and answers. Have we gone over time? Are we doing pretty good on time? Do I need to bring my guitar out and sing some? What are we doing?
We have 10 more minutes, the Q&A, waiting for questions to roll in.
Great. If anybody has any questions, we'll be certainly glad to help. And if you don't, thank you for listening and for being here. It's really important. And you're going to hear a lot of this information as this goes on, and I hope you're exposed to it a bunch. It's relatively new information, relatively new data. The term trauma-informed care is less than 30 years old. The way that we make sure that law enforcement and police, or law enforcement and fire and sane nurses and nursing and every EMTs, they're at their best. That is called trauma-informed care, and it helps reduce the re-victimization of women that have been victims of violent crimes. But the idea has only been around for about 30 years, and you consider the history of policing in nature, in hospitals and all that. It's a relatively new concept. To put that in perspective, The Simpsons have been on air longer than trauma-informed care has been a thing. So if you're tired of hearing the phrase trauma-informed care, please understand that as being an information campaign that is successful. It is hugely important, even though it's relatively new. So I hope that you find resilience and strength here or elsewhere, or in your life, in your spiritual life, in any of those 9 areas of the whole pie wellness plan that we've come up with. It is my sincere hope that you find breaks and moments of peace and moments when you feel like things are going to be okay. I know that sometimes they can be tough to come by, but I'm pulling for you, and we have a lot of people that are pulling for you. Reach out. Call us or contact us with any questions, or maybe not us. We're probably not the very best people. There are people in NAMI that are way highly trained and absolutely dedicated to helping you. What greater calling could it be to help people and care for people that are caregivers? It's a beautiful passion. So I guess if there's no questions, we will sign out of here and let people have a break. And I just saw something in chat here. Let's see what's going on. Language that can be used for an employer that may not prioritize self-care for staff. That is a good question. Yes, the language, there are language tools that can be used. And I'm going to let Marla take care of this because she's awesome at doing this. And she's what I like to call adult supervision. But the essence of it is beginning at the beginning.
Well, I think that employers are walking a tightrope right now because they are extra stressed, more so than normal because of COVID and all of that it entails. And then they also understand better than they used to just how vulnerable all of their employees are to physical or emotional sickness. So I would think that you would just have to have a conversation with them and say, I feel that I am going to get burned out. I feel that I'm not going to do my best work if I don't have whatever it is you need, a full hour for lunch, 10-minute coffee break, not that we, coffee break, but that you need to get off earlier or come in later to exercise, whatever it is that you need to not be on call so many nights a week to recharge. And the real lesson is either they'll respond appropriately and realize your value and how important it is to keep you well so that you can keep others well, or they won't, in which case you're going to have to look at your own boundaries and say, maybe this isn't what I need to be doing. I need to go work for somebody that's going to be more responsive to my needs.
Regarding the 9 areas that seem to be more difficult, that's going to vary according to individuals, of course. You have more on that, Marla?
I'm trying to, I don't know that I understand that question.
Chat, which of the 9 areas, this is Sharita asked this, which of the 9 areas seem the most difficult for caregivers to invest in?
Oh, the balance plan, the 9 areas of the balance plan. I think that's a very individual thing. I know for me personally, when I get really stressed out or I've had a lot of secondary trauma because of the people that I've been working with that day or week, I tend to want to shut down and not talk to people and sit there and watch television or something very benign, which is what I feel like I want to do. But if I push myself and do something else, then I feel better in the long run. And so it really depends on the person. Are they an introvert, an extrovert? What physically, emotionally, spiritually, helps them. I think that's the real issue with self-care. You have to find out what is good for you and then do it. I was joking with someone earlier that they were looking at an exercise video, and I'm like, that doesn't work unless you actually do the exercise compared to just watching the video. So I know to answer this question, again, it depends what kind of caregiver you're talking about. Somebody, and this is probably stereotypical, but a social worker that's a caregiver is going to feel probably more comfortable doing, connecting with others and having maybe some kind of talk therapy, if that's what's called for, compared to somebody in law enforcement that does not have that same background or training, and they're going to be more comfortable exercising or something like that. But whatever it is that makes you get energy instead of feeling depleted is what you should press into as a caregiver.
I would add that if somebody is questioning which one to pursue first, for example, look at the entire list and spend a few seconds on each of the 9 points and let it resonate with your own gut. Whichever one seems the most difficult might be worth pursuing, and it might be worth blowing off. But making that decision intentionally is the key. If you're just not comfortable approaching something, that might be an indication, obviously, that it needs more attention, or that something else does, which maybe find the opposite end of that spectrum, which gets you the most excited, and go there first. Get some victories under your belt. That is a very empowering thing. I didn't see any other questions. Certainly don't want to go over. That's the mortal sin of a speaker. Okay, let's see what we got here. No other questions. All right, so that will conclude our section of this. Please, I do encourage you to go to firstresponderselfcare.help and share that with someone that might need that, someone that didn't see this presentation, because a lot of those are going to be repeated there. But I, again, wish you absolutely the best and most healthy career and longevity and the best outcome of the project that you're working on now and as they come up. Thank you very much from resolutionsolutions.net. We do appreciate you being with us for this last hour. Thank you.